For 40 years, Richard Carpenter kept the truth close to his chest. He gave interviews, he spoke about the music, he accepted the tributes and the awards and the retrospectives. But the one thing people most wanted to understand, the real story of what happened to his sister, and what he wishes he had done differently, he could not bring himself to say out loud. Until now, what Richard Carpenter has finally confirmed will break your heart in ways you did not expect. The warm, unhurried, impossibly beautiful voice that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than a person, like it had been formed by something older and quieter than ordinary life. If you were alive in the 1970s, Karen Carpenter's voice was simply part of the air. It came through car radios on Sunday mornings, it played in department stores at Christmas, it drifted out of kitchen windows on summer afternoons while dinner was being made and children were being called inside. We've only just begun, close to you, top of the world, rainy days and Mondays. Those songs did not just entertain us, they accompanied us. They were playing when we fell in love, when we drove home from difficult evenings, when we sat quietly with our own thoughts and needed something that understood. Karen Carpenter was 23 years old when Close to You went to #1. She was 32 when she died. In between those two facts is a story that most of us have only ever understood in pieces, the outline of a tragedy without the full weight of what it actually cost her to live it. And standing at the edge of that story, for 40 years, has been her brother Richard, the man who arranged the music, built the sound, and was closer to Karen than anyone on earth. The man who watched everything happen and, for a very long time, could not find the words to describe what he had witnessed. He has found them now, and they are not easy to hear. The Carpenters did not happen overnight, even though it sometimes felt that way. Richard was the prodigy first, the boy with the piano and the music theory books, and the seriousness that adults recognized as something rare. Karen came later to music, and she came to it sideways. She joined her high school band at Downey High in California, not out of burning ambition, but simply to get out of gym class. She was handed a glockenspiel, which she hated immediately, and then she saw someone playing the drums. What happened next is one of the most quietly remarkable origin stories in the history of popular music. Karen Carpenter took to the drum kit with an intensity that stunned everyone around her. She practiced until her fingers bled. Her mother kept bandages nearby because the damage to her hands was constant. Within a year, she was playing jazz rhythms that most beginners never attempt. She and Richard won the Hollywood Bowl Battle of the Bands in 1966. They signed with A&M Records in 1969. And in 1970, Close to You spent 4 weeks at #1 and introduced Karen Carpenter's voice to the entire world. The music was undeniable. The talent was real. And for a brief, shining moment in the early 1970s, the Carpenters were exactly what they looked like. A brother and sister who had found each other's perfect complement and turned it into something extraordinary. But underneath all of it, something was already quietly going wrong. There is a moment in Karen Carpenter's story that does not get spoken about enough, and it matters more than almost anything else in understanding what eventually happened to her. It was the decision to take her off the drums. Karen had not come to music through singing. She had come through the drum kit, that loud, physical, gloriously unapologetic instrument that did not ask her to be small or decorative or visible in the way that fame would later demand. Behind the drums, Karen felt protected. She could close her eyes and exist entirely inside the rhythm. She did not have to face the crowd directly. She did not have to smile on cue or manage her appearance or worry about the way a camera captured her face. She could simply play. When A&M Records began expressing concerns in the early 1970s that Karen was difficult to see, that at 5 feet 4 inches, seated behind a large drum kit, she was effectively invisible to audiences, the decision was framed as practical. A marketing adjustment. Nothing personal. Karen was moved to the front of the stage, a touring drummer was hired to replace her, and Karen Carpenter, who had once described the drum kit as the first place she had ever felt truly free, was asked to stand alone in a spotlight and be looked at. She complied. Because Karen always complied. Compliance was the lesson she had learned earliest and most thoroughly. The professional results were spectacular. Top of the world, Grammy Awards, television specials, magazine covers. The Carpenters became one of the best-selling musical acts of the entire decade. And it was right around this time, right around the moment when she was pulled from behind the drums and placed alone at center stage, that the people closest to Karen began to notice changes in the way she looked. She was getting thinner. Not in the gradual, unremarkable way that young women sometimes do. Thinner in a way that alarmed people who knew her, even if they did not yet have the language to say what they were seeing. In 1975, the Carpenters canceled a major tour. The explanation offered to the public was vague: exhaustion, health concerns. Nothing specific, nothing honest. Inside the family, there was fear and confusion, but not yet the kind of clear-eyed intervention that might have changed what came next. Richard was struggling with his own health during this period, a growing dependence on prescription sleeping pills that would eventually require rehabilitation. The two people who most needed to look after each other were both, quietly and in different ways, falling apart at the same time. And the machine kept running. The recording sessions continued. The smiles remained in place. The silence held. What most people didn't know was that Karen Carpenter's illness did not begin in the spotlight. It began at home, years before the first record was made. In a family where love was real but approval was conditional, and where Karen had learned, from the time she was very small, that her needs came last. Richard was the prodigy. That was established early and reinforced constantly. Their mother, Agnes, was deeply invested in Richard's success, in the specific, consuming way that some parents attach their entire identity to one child's achievement. Karen was not neglected exactly, but she was secondary. The family's expectations, their conversations, their plans, all revolved around Richard. Karen watched and adapted and made herself agreeable, because that was what was required of her. There is a detail from Karen's childhood that Richard has recalled in later years, and it stays with you. When Karen once outperformed Richard in a neighborhood baseball game and was chosen ahead of him, her mother, Agnes, reacted not with pride, but with anger. The message was delivered without words but received with perfect clarity. Achievement was acceptable only when it did not challenge the established order. A child who absorbs that lesson early does not forget it. She carries it into every room she enters for the rest of her life. What most people also didn't know was the particular cruelty of what the entertainment industry did to Karen once she was famous. It did not threaten her or bully her or treat her with obvious contempt. It simply watched her. It measured her. It commented constantly and in print on the way her body looked. When she was too thin, journalists noted it. When she was less thin, journalists noted that too. Her appearance was treated as a matter of legitimate public discussion, in a way that her talent, her drumming ability, her songwriting contributions never quite were. She internalized all of it. She was already primed to. The groundwork had been laid in childhood. By the late 1970s, Karen was using laxatives, severely restricting her food intake, and taking thyroid medication she did not need in quantities that were damaging her heart. She had found a form of control in a life where almost nothing felt controllable, and she held on to it with a ferocity that frightened the few people who understood what they were actually seeing. The tragedy, and this is the part that Richard has returned to again and again in his later years, is that almost no one understood what they were seeing. Anorexia nervosa in the 1970s was not a recognized cultural conversation. There were no treatment centers built around it, no public awareness campaigns, no language that a family could pick up and use to name what was happening in their home. Richard has said, plainly, that they did not know. Not because they did not care, but because the knowledge simply did not exist yet. Karen tried. In 1982, she entered treatment with a psychotherapist in New York who specialized in eating disorders. She gained weight. She seemed, to people who saw her, to be recovering. She made plans. She talked about the future. She and Richard began discussing a new solo album. On February 4th, 1983, Karen Carpenter collapsed at her parents' home in Downey, California. She was 32 years old. The cause of death was cardiac arrest brought on by the long-term physical damage of anorexia. Her heart, weakened by years of deprivation, simply stopped. Richard Carpenter was 36 years old when his sister died. He has now lived more than 4 decades without her, and those decades have not been simple or quiet or free from the questions that Karen's death left behind. In the immediate years after February 1983, Richard retreated into the work. He compiled retrospectives, supervised reissues, protected the catalog, and made sure that Karen's voice continued to reach people who had never had the chance to hear it the first time. It was the only thing he knew how to do with the grief. He poured it into the music. But grief that is poured into work does not disappear. It waits. For years, Richard gave interviews in which he was careful, measured, and precise. He spoke about Karen's talent without limit and with obvious love. When the subject of her illness arose, he was honest about the basic facts, but restrained about the deeper questions, about what he wished had been done differently, about what he now understood that he had not understood then. about the specific weight of having been the person closest to her and still not having been able to stop what was happening. It was only as he moved through his 60s and into his 70s that those words began to come. He confirmed what the rumors had always suggested, that Karen's anorexia was far more severe, far more medically dangerous, and far more advanced than the public had ever been told. He spoke about the industry's role in it, not as villains with clear intent, but as a system that scrutinized women's bodies as a matter of routine and never once considered what that scrutiny cost the women who were subjected to it. He spoke about their mother, Agnes, carefully, without cruelty, but honestly. Agnes had been a controlling presence in both their lives, and in Karen's life specifically, a presence that consistently prioritized Richard's needs and Richard's career and found Karen's emotional requirements inconvenient. Richard has not framed this as a simple story of a bad mother. Agnes loved Karen, but love and damage are not mutually exclusive. And Richard has come to understand, at 78, that the family environment Karen grew up in planted seeds that the entertainment industry and the pressures of fame helped grow into something that eventually killed her. He has also spoken about his own grief with a directness that is new. He has described Karen as being silenced too soon. He has said that a voice like hers comes along once in a generation, maybe less, and that had she lived, she would have kept recording into old age, that there were depths in her voice that she had not yet reached when she died at 32. That image, Karen Carpenter at 60, at 70, her voice deepened and seasoned by everything she had lived through, is almost unbearable to sit with. Because we know it was possible. Because we know what prevented it. And because the forces that prevented it were not mysterious or unforeseeable. They were the ordinary cruelties of a world that consumes women and calls the consumption admiration. Richard Carpenter knows all of this now. The knowing did not come quickly or without cost, but it came. Karen Carpenter has been gone for more than 40 years, and her voice has not dimmed by a single degree. If anything, it has grown. New generations find their way to her recordings and react with the same stunned recognition that audiences felt in 1970. The sense that this voice is doing something that voices are not supposed to be able to do. That it is reaching past the eardrum and into something older and more private. Music teachers still use her recordings as examples of perfect breath control, of tone placement, of the specific art of making complex technique sound completely effortless. She changed things. Her death in 1983 was one of the first moments when the general public was forced to confront eating disorders as a genuine medical crisis, rather than a personal failing or a vanity issue. The conversation that began, haltingly and incompletely, in the wake of her death eventually led to more research, more treatment options, and more willingness to speak openly about illnesses that had previously been managed in silence and shame. She did not choose to be that catalyst. She did not choose any of the things that made her story significant beyond the music. But the significance is real, and it has saved lives, and that matters. Richard has spent the decades since her death doing what he can to make sure the music is heard in the best possible form. He has overseen remastered releases that reveal new layers and recordings that seemed already perfect. He has given interviews, written liner notes, and spoken at tributes in ways that consistently redirect attention toward what Karen actually was. A musician of extraordinary gifts who happened to also be a victim of forces that no one around her fully understood in time. He still lives with the what-ifs, he has said so. The interviews she did not get to give, the songs she did not get to record, the woman she did not get to become. At 78, Richard Carpenter is a man who has made a kind of peace with his grief, but who has not pretended the grief is gone. He is also, finally, a man who is willing to say what he could not say before, that the silence was a mistake, that the truth, however painful, honors his sister more than the careful management of her image ever could. Karen Carpenter deserved better from the world she lived in. Richard Carpenter has spent 40 years trying to make sure the world eventually understands that. And now, with time running short and the truth sitting heavy, he is saying it as plainly as he knows how. It is not enough. It can never be enough. But it is something. And for those of us who grew up with her voice as a kind of companion, it means everything. We remember Karen Carpenter for the voice. We always will. There is no way to hear Rainy Days and Mondays or Close to You and not feel something shift inside you, some quiet, private ache that you cannot quite name. But Richard's words ask us to remember something else too, to remember that behind the voice was a person who needed more than the world knew how to give her. A woman who had been taught from the time she was a little girl that her needs came second, who had never quite been shown that she mattered in the way that she did. She mattered enormously. and the world is still living in the echo of her. If Karen Carpenter's voice was part of your life, if you remember where you were the first time you really heard her, or who you were with, we would love to know. Leave a comment below and share that memory with us. These stories deserve to be kept alive by the people who actually lived them. And if you believe in telling the full truth about the legends we grew up loving, subscribe to our channel. There is so much more left to say.